Hello, everyone. We hope you enjoyed your lunch. Welcome to this year's Gandel Forum on the Middle East. This is one of the most popular sessions of the Board of Governors meeting and addresses pressing contemporary issues in the Middle East. Since the horrific October 7th attacks and the ensuing war, I'm sure you'll agree it holds more relevance than ever. Let's move now to our first speaker, Reserves Colonel Dr. Michael Milstein. He's head of the Palestinian Studies Forum at the Moshe Dayan Center for Middle Eastern and African Studies. Up until 2019, Dr. Milstein served as an advisor on Palestinian affairs at COGAT and head of the Department for Palestinian Affairs in the IDF Military Intelligence. Over the years, Dr. Milstein has published 4 books in Hebrew that address Palestinian issues and dozens of articles on strategic developments in the Middle East and the Palestinian arena, as well as on various professional approaches to modern intelligence research. During 2024, he plans to publish a new book on the future of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Dr. Milstein is involved in civil and government initiatives aimed at combating crime and violence in Israel's Arab community and at advancing legislation regarding the study of Arabic in Israel's education system. Dr. Milstein, please, the stage is yours.
Okay. First of all, it's a pleasure for me to be here. I'm glad to be here. I think it's quite odd to analyze or to summarize a war that still continues. You know, we are in about 8 months in a war. We don't know when it will end and how it will end. But I do assess that 8 months, almost 8 months after this war began, we can speak about the historical dimension of this dramatic event. And you know, in Dayan Center, we do analyze contemporary developments with cultural, social, political tools. And I want to speak about the impact of this war. I will speak also about the nature, the unique nature of this war, but also about the future, about the scenarios that Israel will face, or maybe will face, and about the question what Israel should do facing such a dramatic historical challenges. First of all, I would like to draw a deep picture about the war. You know, it's obvious we're not speaking about round of escalation and not about a limited operation. We're speaking about one of the most dramatic events in the history, in 100 years of the history of the Israeli-Arab conflict and of course the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. You know, from the Israeli point of view, we are speaking, I mean October the 7th was the bloodiest day ever in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Never in one day there were so many Israeli casualties, most of them Jews, in one day. Not in 48, not in 67, not in 73, not in 2000, in the Second Intifada. And never there was such a deep invasion into Israeli territory, actually a kind of occupation of Israeli territory, even if a temporary one, and a broad and long-term evacuation of Israelis from Israeli territory. From the Palestinian point of view, and I speak a lot with the Palestinians, some of them are really my friends, and you know, they told me for about, I think it was on October, on May 15, on the Nakba day, you know, they told me this is the real Nakba. The Nakba of 48, it's the lesser Nakba, it's more limited trauma for us. The real Nakba, when we are speaking about the impact, the strategic one, the casualties, the destruction, this is the real Nakba, and I will speak about it immediately. You know, I think that in order really to understand deeply the current situation, we must also try to remember, try to understand how we, the Israelis, thought about reality 8 months ago. And you know, there is one term that appears actually 50 years ago, in 1973. I mean, the conceptia, the dominant idea or the dominant opinion about the the broad situation. It appeared in the intelligence failure of 1973, and it appeared again 8 months ago. And when I'm trying to understand or to analyze how we, and when I say we, I mean political decision makers, security organizations, people from the media, people from the academia, how we thought about the Palestinians, about Gaza, about Hamas 8 months ago, I can say there are several arguments. First of all, most of us considered Hamas as a ruling party, a party that controls Gaza and that is focused very much on civil affairs. For many of us, or we thought that Hamas is much more focused on the relief in Deir el-Balah or the hospitals in Gaza than in advancing or promoting an ideological adventure. And we also had an assumption that by economy, by permits for workers, by improving the exit and the import and the export in Gaza, you can buy security. You can even buy ideology of people. You can deter them. They will have price that they will have to pay if they will even think about ideological adventures. We also rely too much, or actually in a very exaggerated manner, on technology. We relied on the assumption that technology will give us security, mainly in the intelligence. And regarding the Palestinian issue, many of us, mainly in the higher political decision makers, had the assumption that, the Palestinians, they are not important at all. You can open embassies in Riyadh and in other places in the Arab world without negotiations with the Palestinians. And, you can really create a new Middle East without any kind of solution or settlement regarding the Palestinian arena. And when I'm trying to analyze what were the roots of the failure on October the 7th, I think that maybe we had a lack of understanding the culture, the basic codes of logic of the Middle East. We relied on our assumptions, on our logic. We thought that the Arab world, the Palestinian arena, Hamas, they think exactly according to our patterns of thinking, and actually we imposed our logic on them. And this leads me to the main question of why? What was the reason? What were the roots of this offensive, this dramatic offensive of Hamas? And sometimes I feel that when we elaborate such a question, I mean, why? What were the reasons? It reflects the fact that we still don't understand Hamas. Several questions and several answers, which are very much concentrated on the realpolitik, the Western style realpolitik of, logics. They, for example, define all kinds of answers. For example, that Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas in Gaza, he wanted to put an obstacle or to undermine the normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. He wanted to improve his image in the eyes of the people of Gaza. He wanted to maybe even to improve the economic situation in Gaza. And I feel that, all those reasons are very good for let's call it Western style persons, people who think in realpolitik, but it doesn't really touch the ideological deeper way of thinking of Yahya Sinwar. This is my assessment, that Yahya Sinwar, on October the 7th, he knew that he will not defeat Israel. He spent 23 years in Israeli jail. He's maybe the only Palestinian leader that knows Hebrew and really knows the basic codes of the Israeli society, the Israeli public discourse. He knew that he will not defeat Israel, but he wanted other things. He wanted to undermine the basic self-confidence of the Israelis, the existence, the feeling of existence of the Israelis. He wanted to create alienation between the Israelis, the society, and the government, and between groups inside the society. And he wanted also to create hostility between Jews and Arabs, that will actually prevent any kind of idea about political settlement, about peace, about coexistence. And you know, and once again, this is my assessment. I read his book, I'm reading his articles and his speeches, and first of all, I do assess that he considers himself as the new Salah ad-Din. You know, I mean, the offensive was the mission of his life. He planned it for 10 years. Many years before the idea of normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel was elaborated. And I assess that he thought that this kind of offensive will be the first break, the first step in a long journey, a long-term journey that in the end will bring the erase of Israel. But by the way, when you speak with radical Islamists, and I spoke a lot with kind of people like that, you do understand two things. First of all, that they do not regret about nothing. You can go to Yahya Sinwar right now and speak with him about 40,000 people that were killed in Gaza and about the total destruction. He will tell you, that's okay. This is the price of jihad because, you know, we had no other choice. This is what God obeyed us. So we must get into their mind. And now I would also want to speak not only about the Palestinians and not only about Hamas, but also about us, about Israel. And as I described before, this is one of the most dramatic conflicts, events that really already, after 8 months, it's changed Israel. You know, I assess that we are still in the stage of trauma. We are not in the PTSD, you know, in the post-trauma phase. And there are two things, and there is a contradiction between them. First of all, when you speak with the Israelis since October the 7th, you can feel that a lot of, let's call it historical, negative memories are being elaborated from the bottom of the consciousness, of the historical consciousness. You know, the terms of Holocaust, Shoah, is repeated a lot in the Israeli political, media, public discourse. But on the other hand, when you want to be more realistic and you want to be more sharp in your analysis about what is happening in the Israeli society, there are two even positive things that happened. First of all, we must say in a very realistic manner, there is no existential threat, at least right now, on Israel. You know, I do assess that the 1973 war actually represented much more dramatic, from the military point of view, much more dramatic threat than the threats today. And the other one is that the Israeli society, the Israeli public, demonstrated unique rate of solidarity, of resilience. You know, in many manners, I do assess that the public, the society, is much more stronger and even clever than the leadership. I think that this was one of Yahya Sinwar's surprise. He once again, he knows very good the Israeli society, but I do think that he assessed that the Israeli society is very weak. You know, we spoke about the spider's web. They are so weak, they will immediately collapse and they cannot suffer so many casualties. And he was surprised by the Israeli society. If we want to speak about the lessons of the Israeli society regarding the Palestinians, I think that, you know, many of us, not all of us, but I think I can say even the majority of the Israelis, we understood on October the 7th that, you know, the whole equations about the conflict between us and the Palestinians, and the assumption that only if you will solve the occupation and maybe economic problems, so there will be a peace, things are much more complicated. We and the Palestinians, I will describe it in a very even ironic manner, biologically we are the same, but culturally we are not the same. You know, we have different terms or different interpretations for moral, for truth, for the other, the way we treat the other. And the Israelis did understand on October the 7th that things are much more complicated. You know, I study a lot the Palestinian arena, the Palestinian discourse after October the 7th. And there are two things that you can find that are very dominant among the Palestinians actually before and after October the 7th. First of all, I call it bipolar behavior. You know, there are two kinds of behavior among the Palestinians. They are very proud or even glorify the offensive, even the more aggressive and even brutal expressions of this offensive, or they are victims. You know, those are the two choices. There is no soul searching. There is no self-criticism or questions. For example, to Hamas. I mean, that the public of Gaza will elaborate questions for Yahya Sinwar. They didn't see him for about 8 months. What was all this adventure about? What was the aim of this adventure? When it will end? You see, from time to time there is a very limited and a very weak criticism, but the mainstream is still very passive. And the other one, and this is you can feel this problematic, negative phenomenon from a lot of investigations of Hamas members, mainly the Nukhba, the elite forces of Hamas that were caught on October the 7th. We are speaking about dehumanization, very broad one, of the Israelis, mainly the Jews, that you can really feel. This kind of issue was expressed in the massacre of October the 7th. But you know, when you're checking the discourse among the Palestinians, it's very prominent. And when, for example, you check polls, I mean Palestinian one, they were committed by Palestinians in the Palestinian arena during the last half a year. First of all, you can see how broad is the support of Hamas. By the way, it's very interesting, mainly from the people of the West Bank. You know, they are not involved by themselves in the conflict. They do not suffer in the way the people of Gaza suffer. So they feel that, you know, in theoretical manner, it is very good to say that we support Hamas. And the other thing that it is even quite, you know, it creates disappointment among a lot of Israelis is the broad denial about the war crimes of October the 7th. Most of the Palestinians do not believe that such a monsters or such a brutal activities could get out of their national body. You know, it's amazing. I spoke with a lot of Palestinians, and you know, off record, some of them will say, you know, we know there were brutal, horrible war crimes. But on the record, you know, they will never say in public that such a thing. I think that maybe there is one or two intellectuals, journalists, Palestinians, that really announced, you know, in a very clear manner that Hamas committed terror attacks and Hamas committed war crimes, and they were attacked even in a brutal manner in the Palestinian arena by other Palestinians for not being enough loyal to the national interests. I would also now I would like to speak about the future, and then I will leave time for several questions. You know, first of all, I would like to speak about Gaza. Of course, this is the you know, the center, the heart of the current conflict. And the answers, also the questions that the Israelis elaborate, are very complicated because, you know, in order to be realistic again, and not to speak about conceptual illusions, we must admit that all the alternatives that Israel faces, all of them are bad. And we need to choose out of them the least worst alternative or scenario. And when we check the prominent alternatives, I will describe all of them and all the problems that we can find in each of them. For example, there are many people in Israel that do speak about direct control over Gaza. First of all, you know, there are even people in the government that speak about re-establishment of the settlements in Gaza that were left on the 2005. At this point, first of all, there is one big no from the world about such an idea. And, you know, I think that most of the Israelis, they do understand the security, political, international, economic, heavy prices of such a scenario of controlling 2.2 million people, miserable in a total destruction today in Gaza. There is another alternative of getting into Gaza, causing Hamas, you know, not only Hamas but Gaza, broad destruction, really, you know, implementing the goals of erasing the governmental and the military capabilities of Hamas, but then after that to get out of Gaza. And the problem is that there will be a vacuum that will be filled by even more crazy guys than Hamas. You know, in the Middle East, there are more crazy guys than Hamas, ISIS-style organizations, etc. And I do think that it's going to be also a very negative, even horrible scenario to see a little Mogadishu or a little Kabul next to the southern borders of Israel, next to Ashkelon. There is a very good idea. I support it to convince the PA to return to Gaza. They left it on 2007 when Hamas took control brutally on this area. The main problem is that, you know, if you meet PA officials or you visit the West Bank, you do understand very quickly. The PA is very weak. Its image in the eyes of its own people is very bad. You know, today, according to the poll I showed you before, 93% of the people of the West Bank, they want Abu Mazen to resign. They do believe that the PA is corrupted. And, you know, the PA today barely controls the northern parts of Samaria, of Jenin and Tulkarem areas. So you don't really want them to have the responsibility or the role to control 2.2 people who for 20 years were taught that they are the enemy, they are collaborator with Israel. I think that it's much above their capacities. There is, I think, that the least worst scenario, that a local administration, Palestinian one, will be created in Gaza, and in a gradual manner will be developed and could be the regime in Gaza. Of course, Israel, during this period, Israel will take care on the security level. The main problem here is that in order to implement this scenario, this goal, you have to control all Gaza, not a part of Gaza, and not to get into Shati and Rimal and Jabalia, and then to get out and to get it will give you nothing. If you really want a new reality to be created in Gaza, you need to stay over there, boots on the ground. And right now, and I must be very frank and very clear, I think that Israel faces a T-junction. There are only two options, not more than two options. The first one is to be serious enough and to implement the goal of, taking control over all Gaza. Of course, it's a dramatic decision, and I'm not sure that Israel has the capacities or the willingness today to promote such an idea. The other one is to promote right now a deal regarding the hostages, to release all the hostages, and of course, the prices of this scenario, of this deal, will be very heavy. It means that we have, first of all, to release a lot of hundreds, maybe thousands of terrorists with blood on their hands from the Israeli jail. We need to halt, not to stop forever the war right now. We need also, it seems like that, to withdraw from all the territories that were took by Israel till today. But I think that between those two alternatives, I think that this is the more realistic one. And then, I can even hope that people, maybe other people, not the current leadership, will sit and plan much more serious strategic plans about how to create a new situation in Gaza. You know, this war was opened by surprise. There were no really, very detailed plans about how to take all Gaza and how to create a new government in Gaza. And maybe we need 1, 2, 3 years, and after that to promote the great change. Because right now it seems that with the current policy, with the current military and political strategy, it won't bring us the goals that we determined on October the 7th. In a more general manner, I think that we, the Israelis, we had two collective conclusions from this is my opinion, my personal one, from October the 7th. And there is a contradiction between those two conclusions. The first one is that basically, we the Palestinians, we cannot live in one entity with no borders. There are still all kinds of utopic ideas of one state, Eretz Israel, between the river and the sea, no borders. All of us will sit under the olive trees and eat labaneh and pita bread. That's okay, but I think that October the 7th proved that this is a formula for a Bosnian-style hell, not for a utopic reality. The other conclusion was that if there will be total freedom and total sovereignty of the Palestinians, it means existential threat. Because, the Palestinians could really build a new Hong Kong, a new Singapore in Gaza since 2005, but they insisted to take 70 or 80 cents from every dollar they got and to spend it on jihad, on tunnels and rockets and sniper guns and everything. So I think that the next goal, strategic one, of the Zionist project will have to promote both targets in a very calculated, very cautious manner. We need to draw physical border, not all kind of general borders, physical borders between us and the Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank. But we need to make sure that this kind of scenario will not lead to existential threats. And it means, for example, that you, Israel, will have to control the gates of the Palestinians, and I don't know what will be the status of the future Palestinian entity. I don't care, by the way, if it will be a state, but the gates of this state, the Jordan Valley and the Philadelphia corridor, the border between Gaza and Sinai, will be controlled by Israel. For how long? I don't know. But it seems that this is the least worst scenario. And I will end with that. I think that, in this horrible war, I think that there are some opportunities to make fundamental, positive changes in Israel. I think that this war elaborates a lot of questions. For example, about the game rules in Israel. What are the agreements, the social agreements with the groups in the Israeli society, like the Haredim and like the Israeli Arabs? What are the duties? What are the rights? I think that it's time to determine new things about it. I think that we should improve our basic understanding about the environment. For example, to determine that teaching and learning Arabic, the spoken language, it will be a duty. Today it's a very limited, less and less people in Israel. People in Israel know Arabic, and I think that, in the Middle East, it's an existential principle to know the language, because the language also represents codes of culture. And I think that we must strengthen our capability to portray ourselves as the forward base of the Western civilization. It won't happen if we will not maintain or preserve the democratic principles and our democratic characters. And I think that this is a very important lesson that the current and the future one, should learn. And I do think that we have... we don't have time? Okay. Thank you.
So unfortunately, we don't have any time for questions, but thank you so much, Michael, for your speech. Now, for the second part of this session, I would like to invite Reserves Major General Tamir Hyman, Executive Director of the Institute for National Security Studies. Major General Hyman joined the INSS as Managing Director in 2022. Prior to joining the INSS, Major General Hyman was Chief of the IDF Intelligence Directorate from 2018 to 2021. During his 34 years of IDF service, Major General Hyman held a wide range of command positions in the ground forces, including operational combat experience in the security zone in Lebanon and in the Palestinian arena. Major General Hyman joined the IDF General Staff in 2015 and served as commander of the National Defense College, while also acting as commander of the Northern Corps, where he led the largest training exercise ever carried out by the IDF. His period of service and intelligence was characterized by ongoing tension in the Palestinian arena, in Gaza, and intense struggles aimed at limiting Iranian entrenchment into Syria, all while dealing with the Iranian challenge emerging throughout the Shia axis. Major General Hyman holds a bachelor's degree in political science and economics and a master's degree from the National Defense College. Sir, please join me on the podium.
Very difficult hour. I imagine I will be losing some of you to a good nap. So I'll start with what I'm going to talk that will create you maybe some appetite to stay awake. And I'll try to explain the complexity of the war right now by addressing the points that were issued by the Minister Gantz, Minister Gantz, when he issued some form of ultimatum to the government that should be fulfilled up to the 8th of June by explaining or introducing 6 points of friction or complexity, I think, that covers all of the very unique situation that we are facing right now in the war. So what were the 6 points to be achieved until 8th of June? That's, I think, next week or something like that. We should start soon. First of all, to conclude the destruction of Hamas as a military entity and to remove it out of the controlling power of the Gaza Strip. Second, to go as fast as we can to a hostage deal. Third, to decide regarding who is the next civilian ruling address on Gaza, which is by the Israeli sentiment, it's called the day after question that Michael spoke a little bit. Fourth is to return back the evacuated civilians from the northern part of Israel that we have evacuated, almost 63,000 people. Fifth is the situation regarding I'll get back to that. The final one is about the conscription law, and the fifth one I have a minute. Okay. Normalization with Saudi, a little thing. To create the pathways towards normalization of Israel with Saudi Arabia and that interconnection between the United States and Israel. So all of those 6 themes are really the crucial questions that should be addressed. Let me follow them and try to explain where we are. Regarding the first one, the destruction of the military capability of Hamas. Hamas is a multi-layered organization. It has some form of a military dimension. It looks like a military. When you see it from a distance, you have a chain of command and controls, you have ranks, you have communication corps, you have strategic corps, you have artillery, even you have a military industry under the ground, but the military industry. It is divided into brigades. There are 5 brigades, 5 regional brigades. Each brigade has battalions. You have overall 24 battalions. It looks like an army. That element can be destroyed by military. The problem is that it's not just a military organization, it's also a terror organization embedded inside civilian aspect, inside civilian population, and it's also a religious section in Islam, very radical one, based on self-jihad, like the ones that are familiar to most of you in the sentiment of Al-Qaeda or ISIS. It's a broader spectrum that in the one side you have an idea of Islamic Brotherhood, and the other section you have ISIS, and in the middle Hamas is located. So it is a distinct, not so distant relative of ISIS, and it also is a social organization that takes care of about almost a million people that on his payroll on a welfare care system. And he's an idea, and that's an idea of Hamas. So it's a multilateral, multi-level organization. In terms of military might, by maneuvering, by firepower, you can only destroy one element. The idea, the concept that was originated when we started the war, when I say we, I'm partly involved because in my reservist duty I lead some form of a strategic team for the Ministry of Defense. So sometimes I use the word we when the planning took place back in October. The plan was that the initial phase, you destroy the military element. That should take about 3 months. After that, Hamas will be dissolved into small terror groups and guerrilla. Those will be eliminated by a chain of constant military raid and special operation that will take time. Our initial plan is that we have predicted that it will take us about a year overall to conduct those ongoing attempts. And how do we deal with the idea? How do we fight the idea, the civil element of Hamas? The idea was, the principle was to embed an alternative idea into Gaza, an alternative civilian entity that will create some kind of a competition to the idea of the Islamic Brotherhood. And when should we do that? It was supposed to be between the first stage after 3 months and the second stage. And the idea was, it's very complicated, that you are destroying while rebuilding. You are continuing the ongoing assaults on Gaza, on Hamas, rooting out those terror organizations, and by the way, simultaneously, you present an alternative civilian address that will create that kind of a competition that eventually will evolve to some form of alternative mechanism of regime over the Gaza. The problem is that although we decided upon that, when it came the time to really take the decision, it was postponed. It should have been done in late January, mid-February, and still, till this day, by the way, tomorrow is the first discussion over it. It will take place tomorrow at the cabinet. It took us a very long time to decide. Why? Because of the political element of the decision. Any form of an acceptance of some form of a Palestinian authority that can be somehow an alternative to Hamas, that is the Fatah, is highly volatile right now and cannot be accepted. I'll come back to that when I'll discuss the day after. So that's the first stage. What we are doing right now, we have almost concluded the dismantling of the 24 battalions. In the terms of fighting the military element, we have still left with 6 battalions, 4 of them in Rafah, and 2 in what we call the Central Brigade Battalion, Central Camp Brigade. Right now, the IDF works in Rafah in order to dismantle those 4 remaining brigades, but more important, to control the border between Sinai and Gaza, which is the main artery that supplies munition, arms, that may, if we are not going to control that, or some form of mechanism of security will be implanted there, it will probably revive itself. Hamas will have the ability to revive itself. So we are working right now on the Philadelphia route. The 3/4 of the way are behind us and working on the 4th remaining battalions out there. But that will not solve the question of the alternative civilian ruling entity and the day after. Second element is the day after issue. The problem is that we could have done what Michael said. We could have decided on military regime. That is to conquer Gaza, to maintain presence there, and eradicate Hamas over the long period of time. We decided that that's not the right way to go, but to go to an alternative civilian ruling address. Right now, there is no one that is capable of taking that position. First of all, because Hamas is too strong. First of all, you need to weaken it. And second, the only possible candidate for the job is the Palestinian Authority, which is very weak, corrupted, and full of problems. So what's the idea is? The idea is to create some form of a 3-layered mechanism. On the top layer, on the overall arching layer, it's an international coalition based on United States, Gulf states, Jordan, and Egypt. That's the overall international coalition that will monitor, support, and control the layers beneath it. The middle layer, the operational government, let's call it, it's that sensitive issue of the Palestinian Authority. The idea is to start with a tiny cell, only excuse, only something very weak, only representative of the Palestinian Authority, and over the time to create something that can expand and in condition that it will carry out reforms and will mend the very dramatic problems that Palestinian Authority suffers from it. So it's a kind of evolving situation. And the bottom layer, that is also complicated but practical, it's what we call the distribution of the humanitarian aid. Right now, the humanitarian aid, those convoy of humanitarian are being supplied, distributed by Hamas, which is very bad because that is how they regain their authority and sovereignty, and we are not replacing it. So the idea is to cut Gaza into small districts, and every district will be under control of one of the entity from the international coalition. Let's take, for example, the UAE. They will control one of the villages of Gaza. They will distribute the humanitarian aid and will carry out the necessary security by contractors, by any means they will decide on. So that's the bottom layer. Seems maybe positive in the long term, but cannot be accepted. Why? First of all, any mentioning of the Palestinian Authority right now breaks the Israeli government, dissolve the cabinet, and we go into election. Because the ultra-right wing in the members of the cabinet will not accept the Palestinian Authority. Secondly, any kind of international coalition will come only on the condition, will condition its arrival of a formal invitation from the Palestinian Authority, and they're convinced, the idea that they are not just providing money, they are working on a political process that will end up with some form of a state, or Palestinian state. And this is also unacceptable, by the way, not just by the Israeli government, by the general sentiment on the street. Any idea of a Palestinian state that consider giving present to terror, unacceptable. So that's where we are stuck right now. If they will not accept a seed of a Palestinian Authority, we are stuck in an ongoing operation without the decision. Next is the hostage deal. Up to now, Hamas is the responsible on destroying any suggestions that were presented by the Israeli side for a hostage deal. Why? Because Sinwar believes that the worst is behind him. The war is about to end because of international pressure by the international community over Israel, by the fact that the internal legitimacy of the war inside Israel is crumbling, And the worst, in terms of operational pressure, the worst is behind him. It used to, there was an ongoing operation on all the aspect of Gaza, on all Gaza Strip. Right now it's centered on just on Rafah. So he only needs to wait, and he will achieve what he desires for, and that is that in a framework of a hostage deal, the war will be end totally terminated, and all of Israeli forces will withdraw from Gaza. So why rush things? In the last occasion that was happened, the last round of negotiation, it was disrupted by the fact that Sinwar, although what we agreed on 33 hostages to be released, on the final minute he said, I have no 33 under my control, I have only 18, and the gap between 18 to 33, I will provide bodies, dead. And that was unacceptable, so the deal was broken. So what's the alternative? What Michael mentioned just now. He wants to get a one-step deal, all for all. Israeli acceptance of terminating the war immediately, withdrawing all its forces for Gaza, and return for all of the hostages to relief, of course, of additional payment by prisoners, the Palestinian prisoner. That's obvious, hundreds of them. So, Israel government right now does not accept that because it may be interpreted by the mass, by you, as a total defeat. What happened? You withdraw, Hamas is still there. Why have we lost all of those soldiers along the war? So it's very sensitive in terms of political, it's very sensitive against the narrative of Netanyahu, of the total victory, etc., etc. The situation in the north. Unfortunately, from a mistake, that's my personal opinion, we have evacuated the civilians out of the northern part of Israel. That created the great, I think the strategic achievement of Nasrallah is that the fact that he right now maintaining the situation that 63,000 civilians of Israelis are evacuated, are refugees in their own homeland. That's a huge success in terms of the Iranians. Nasrallah does not want to get involved in a full-scale war right now, although that was the plan of Sinwar. If it was to Sinwar's will, he should have just started the first initial steps, and all of the excess of resistance from Iran through all of its proxies should assault Israel simultaneously. That was the idea behind the initial surprise attack of the 7th of October. Hezbollah is not full to join in, he's too smart for that, but he can't stand aside, so he's now participating below the threshold of a full-scale war in order to divert our attention, to divide our forces, and to create some form of a narrative that he's a dominant player in the resistance front, he helps Hamas. Right now, the only potential of resolving the war in the north is by the declaration of according to Nasrallah, that in a case of a ceasefire in the south, he will pause all activities. That does not eliminate the threat of Hezbollah. And the question right now is how you convince a civilian that sees his house shattered by anti-tank missiles, knowing that Hezbollah still exists out there, just across the border, to return back to their home. That's a huge question. Most Israeli civilians who live in the north say that without a full-scale war with Hezbollah to crush its military capability, they will not return back to their homes. For Israel, right now, according to or facing the context of the international legitimacy, to launch a full-scale assault on Lebanon could be very, very dangerous in terms of maintaining United States support, which we will need dramatically. Imagine what will happen today if we will level down Beirut, main Arab capital. If we would cause unintentionally collateral damage of 3,000 Lebanese civilians not involved. we may end up as a pariah state, sanctions, without backing of United States. So right now, it's really, to go to a full-scale war, it's unacceptable. It's really, I think, not suitable for Israel right now. So we will probably end up by ceasing fire in the south in the framework of a hostage deal and securing the status of the north with some kind of agreements that are monitored by United States or some form of international entity. That is, we must withdraw Radwan forces from southern Lebanon. Radwan is the special operation unit of Hezbollah that has the capability of infiltration to Israel. The same capability like Hamas did in the 7th of October. The equivalent of Nukhba, who did the atrocities of the 7th of October, is Radwan in the north. We cannot accept the situation that they will be deployed along the fence of the Lebanese border. So in a framework of a deal of understanding, temporary, by the way, they must withdraw, and there need to be some form of international entity that will control or prevent them from returning back. Regarding the normalization with Saudis, and in a minute all things will be tied into one element. I imagine some people have already tied all the connections, all the elements. Normalization with Saudi. The problem is that the window of opportunity is closing. The Saudis doesn't really want normalization with Israel. They could live without the formal acceptance of Israel as an entity in the Middle East. They are just going to pay prices and not receive from Israel much, but they can receive a lot from United States. That's the deal. The deal is that they will normalize the situation with Israel. In extent, they will receive from United States a civilian enrichment plant, quality military edge in terms of military equipment, and some form of a treaty, of a defense treaty between United States and the Saudis. That's a full acceptance of Saudis. Probably most of you remember that and I think Biden said it's an inauguration speech that the Saudi is a pariah state. That's really, we walked a long way from that aspect to a status that they will be in some form of a formal treaty. In order to get that, you need both parties accepting that, and we have no time before the election. Why is that important to Israel? Full integration of Israel with Saudi, that creates a unity of coalition against Iran and the Axis front and the resistance front. We saw a demonstration of that potential in the 14th of April. And that was truly amazing. All countries in the region joined forces under the supervision of United States and defended Israel from the Iranian attack of over 500 missiles from all across. It was amazing. That really is something that Iranians can consider a strategic threat, that in front of the resistance front, there will be a coalitions of the moderated, coalitions of the Arab states and Israel. Real dramatic evolvement that is very positive in terms of Israel. The last is the conscription law, that the law that forces the ultra-Orthodox youth of Israelis to join the army, to enlist. Right now, the Haredim are not enlisting, and because of the fact that from military, just from the element of military need, right now, after the 7th of October, we need more soldiers. And that's changed all of the status quo that was there for 75 years. And right now, it's about to change. Very, very sensitive in terms of the Israeli coalition. If that will happen, the ultra-Orthodox party that are a part of the right-wing coalition right now will probably break the government. So it's another complexity that we are facing right now. So there you have it, a bunch of 6 complicated situations, each one of them with dead end, and it seems like it's becoming more vicious as long as we are prolonging it and delaying any decisions. We are getting the situation more complicated. So how can we get out of it right now? No quick wins, no real Hollywood-style movie end where, no, I'm sorry. It will be frustrating. It will be something that in the general sentiment right now, it's not popular. And that will be some form of Israel to agree to a ceasefire for the relief of the hostages. What's the potential? Rafah. Why Rafah? As long as we did not enter Rafah, there was also always Rafah, lurking in the dark. What about Rafah? We need to Rafah. Rafah became Stalingrad of the new age. Everybody knows. I heard students in Berkeley speak about Rafah when they don't know where exactly Israel is. But they know Rafah. Rafah. By the way, this is the weakest brigade in Hamas. Really not really operational challenge. But there is no Rafah after Rafah. Okay, so we've concluded the intensive part of the war. We can say to ourselves with honesty, we have concluded the major element of the intensive part of the war. So right now, in exchange for withdrawing from Gaza, terminating the fight, by the way, temporary, because they will give us enough excuses to continue the fighting. Believe me, Milstein, he knows better Hamas than me. They will give us the excuse. They will not forfeit the resistance element in their identity. They are a resistance, they will fight. They will give us enough excuses. In the pause that will be created because of the hostage exchange, there will be a ceasefire. The fire in the north will terminate, it will end. Then we can establish some framework of understanding with Hezbollah, monitored, escorted by United States, of course, and present an idea of normalization with Saudi. What's the obstacle? Again, Palestinian Authority and a vision of a two-state. But after all of the options are laid before the Israeli decision makers, it's obvious that the Palestinian Authority, if it will be transformed, reformed, it can be a model that can be duplicated to the West Bank. Right now, as we speak right now, we are living with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. No, nobody really shouts how that situation is possible. It's flexible, it's suitable. They are taking control over the life of 3 million civilians, Palestinians in the West Bank. We are daily working there in order to provide security for in our interest, working together. But it's corrupt, it has problems, it's pay for slay, all of the problems, it works against us in the ICJ and ICC, all of those problems. So if the international community, Arab states, by the way, I just returned from the UAE. They know how to reform Arabs. We don't know. We don't understand that. They know that you can't fool them over a facade reform. They are too shrewd and too smart to accept that. So if they condition their support of billions in order to recover, reconstruct Gaza, by reforming the Palestinian Authority and close monitoring them by a process, not a minute, it will take 2 years. Eventually that model can be duplicated to the West Bank. That will bring us in a better situation than we are today. And what about vision of a two-state solution? Well, it's in the horizon. You know about what they say about the horizon. Yeah, as you get closer, it gets farther. A horizon of a two-state solution, I can accept it. Somewhere, sometimes it will happen. Unfortunately, although it's possible, although tangible, or now, although you can feel it on the tips, because it will break the government, because right now it cannot be accepted by because of political fragility of the Israeli status. It will be hanging there as an exit strategy waiting to be pulled down. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reserves Major General Tamir Hyman, Executive Director of the Institute for National Security Studies, and thanks again to Reserves Colonel Dr. Michael Melstein. Thank you both so much for helping us understand the conflict a little bit better.